You don't deserve to eat the food. After my husband's wake was over, my mother-in-law loudly scolded me at the reception after the wake. Amidst the luxurious platters of food, there was only one simple cup of instant ramen noodles in front of me. I guess she fed him this kind of food all the time. Daniel's death was your fault, for making him continue to eat poorly. It's all your fault. I started to cry. Then I picked up the fork. Thank you. What? Without paying attention to my bewildered mother-in-law, I sobbed and slurped my ramen. Because this is... My name is Natalie. I'm a 28-year-old housewife, married for 3 years this year. I met my husband Daniel in college, and we started dating. When I first met him, he seemed to be a kind, soft-spoken young man, but as we got more involved, I saw a very passionate side of him.
You should read this author's book. It's very interesting.
You're lending it to me again? I'll look forward to reading it. I'll read it as soon as I get home. He is a bookworm, and when he talks about books, his tone turns passionate. Since I love to read too, we got along right away and started going out. Daniel had always said since he was a student that he'd like to work for a publishing company in the future, and his enthusiasm did not wane when he began his job search. I still remember how happy I was for him when we hugged each other on the day he received the letter of offer. I was also interested in working in the publishing industry, but my parents wanted me to get a job as a medical clerk and work at a nearby clinic, so that was what I did. And we started living together upon graduation, and when I was in my 3rd year of working and getting used to the job, we decided to get married. We were really happy living together, so I had no hesitation when accepting his proposal. However, there was one big change when we got married.
If you don't want to, I won't force you to. But can we live with my mother?
Daniel made this suggestion apologetically at the dinner table. Daniel's father had passed away in a car accident when he was in high school, so his mother now lived by herself. Daniel also has an older brother, Kevin, but he and his mother don't seem to get along well, and he left home as soon as he started college. Okay, I'm sure your mother would be worried about living alone forever. I was a little hesitant, but gladly accepted. I had seen my mother-in-law several times since I visited Daniel's parents' house, and she had been kind to me, so I wasn't too worried about living with her. Besides, I knew that Daniel loved his mother very much, and often contacted and visited her. So I kind of expected that he would ask about living with his mother, taking into account the situation. We moved out of the apartment we were living in and moved in with his mother. At the time, I thought that we would begin a happy life together with my husband, who cherishes his family, and my mother-in-law, who is kind to me. However, my hopes were dashed as soon as we moved in together. Why is dinner so late? Make it by 6 o'clock. I usually go to bed early, but I have to work until 5. You're talking back at me like that? Don't get carried away. You're just as slow as your parents. I'm sorry. When we started living together, my mother-in-law's attitude changed drastically. In front of Daniel, she acts nice to me, but when he is away from home, she starts to bully me. The harassment is not limited to verbal abuse. When my mother-in-law took a bath before me, the hot water in the bathtub was drained out, and I even found some of my favorite clothes that were in the living room thrown away. At first, I put up with it, but the harassment gradually escalated. I couldn't take it anymore. So after a few months, I thought of talking to Daniel about it, but...
You've been looking a little down lately. Is there something troubling you?
Actually... No, it's nothing. Maybe I'm just tired from staying up late.
I see. Well, I'm sorry, but I have an early start tomorrow, so I'm going to bed first.
Daniel was concerned about me, but I couldn't talk to him about it because I didn't want to disturb him when he was tired from work. He was assigned to the editorial department, which was said to be one of the busiest in the publishing company, and there were many days when he was so busy with work that he couldn't come home. This was especially true during the busy season. Sometimes he would come home in the middle of the night, but he would fall asleep immediately and go to work early in the morning with a change of clothes. Even on his days off, he would read through piles of new books and receive incessant phone calls from his bosses, authors, and illustrators, so he never got rest. Even so, he did not complain, and in fact, he seemed to be doing his best, but the dark circles under his eyes were getting darker day by day. If I put any more pressure on Daniel, he would break down. With this thought in mind, I was careful not to let Daniel know about it, no matter how harsh my mother-in-law was to me. Daniel seems to be having such a hard time, but you have it so easy as a clerk. My mother-in-law once told me such a sarcastic comment. It's true that my job is easier than Daniel's, but it's hard work to learn technical terms and deal with complaints. Besides, I didn't want my mother-in-law to say that to me, of all people. My mother-in-law has been a housewife since she got married, and still lives on her inheritance and pension. In addition, she is always complaining about my housework, but never tries to do anything at home herself. She spends all day watching TV and going out to lunch with her friends. Does she think I'm her free housekeeper? When I came home from work and hurriedly started to prepare dinner, my mother-in-law wouldn't leave the TV, and to top it off, she started complaining about it. The exhaust fan is making too much noise. I can't hear the TV. I can't turn it off, even if she says so. I went to a buffet lunch today and I'm full, so I don't need dinner. Daniel can't come home either, can he? Well, why don't you just skip your meal today? Skipping once wouldn't hurt. You have a job that doesn't require you to move anyway. How selfish of her. I bit my lip, unable to say anything out loud. In the end, I decided to heat up a frozen prepared meal alone that day. At least if Daniel was there. I tried to be patient, but his work had become even busier than before. His working environment had become more and more demanding, with a new boss who pushed him too hard, and a colleague who suddenly quit because he could no longer stand the overwork. He said he only gets a couple of hours of sleep every night. I was exhausted by my mother-in-law's harassment, but I was determined to support him as much as I could as his wife. On days when he came home late, I cooked a well-balanced dinner that was easy to digest and put a relaxing aroma in the bedroom. As a wife supporting her husband, none of these things were special, but Daniel seemed to realize my efforts. I also kept a spare of Daniel's favorite items, from cups to socks, and replaced them with new ones as soon as they broke. Recently, perhaps due to fatigue, he has been dropping cups and forks in his hands, and when I immediately offered him the same cup that broke, he was surprised.
Wow, you've been ready. I'm so thankful for you always taking care of me, even though I haven't been available at the house.
He looked apologetic, but also looked sincerely pleased. It's okay, but don't overdo it. Your body is the most important thing.
Thank you. I heard that there are plans to increase the number of staff in 6 months, so when that happens, we should go on a trip together.
I was so happy to hear such a suggestion from Daniel, who was busy with his work, that I almost cried. And since we hadn't had any time alone without my mother-in-law for a while, I made up my mind to endure this life, looking forward to the trip. But that trip never came to be. The next week, around 2 a.m., my phone rang.
Your husband collapsed and was taken to the hospital.
What? Hospital? My mind went blank, and I felt like blood drain away quickly. After hearing the name of the hospital from his boss on the phone, I woke up my mother-in-law and headed for the hospital in my pajamas. I jumped out of the cab and rushed to the hospital, where I was told that Daniel was being treated in the ICU. According to Daniel's supervisor in the waiting room, a security guard found him collapsed at work and called an ambulance. He was working alone in the middle of the night, which delayed the discovery. The doctor came out of the treatment room shortly afterwards, and my mother-in-law and I crowded around him as we demanded an explanation. The doctor's diagnosis was that he had suffered a stroke, probably caused by overwork. Doctor, will my husband recover?
He still has a beating heart, but honestly, the situation is very difficult. I am so sorry.
He said that since his symptoms were so severe, maybe he had been feeling numbness in his limbs on a regular basis. Come to think of it, That's why he used to drop his forks and cups so often. I blamed myself so much for not noticing the signs that I slumped down on the spot and couldn't move for a while. Please, Daniel, wake up. I prayed desperately for Daniel's recovery, but he did not wake up and passed away a few days later. I couldn't believe Daniel was gone that I could hardly eat. Still, I felt I had to fulfill my role as a wife, and together with my mother-in-law we prepared for the funeral. My mother-in-law seemed equally sad, but she kept venting her pain on me. My son died because you didn't take care of him. She frequently says such things to me, but in my weakened state of mind I repented, believing that my mother-in-law was right. If I had been more sympathetic and concerned about Daniel's health, if I had been quicker to notice the slightest change, Daniel may have still been alive. My mother-in-law's outbursts stung deeply in my heart, but I put up with them because I knew it must have been painful for her too. However, the verbal abuse increased day by day. At first, she was sincerely sad about Daniel's death and was very hard on me, but then she started using Daniel's death to bully me. Daniel collapsed because of your slow housework. She yelled at me every time she saw me with her incomprehensible logic. My mother-in-law's words and my self-blame began to accumulate, and I began to decline rapidly. Still, we managed to get the funeral in shape, and the day of the wake arrived. Relatives and friends gathered to remember Daniel and to say kind words to us, but I was just going through the process with an empty mind, so no one's words really left me comforted. Perhaps because I was so zoned out, my brother-in-law Kevin called out to me.
I think Daniel was happy to have married you, Natalie. I know it's hard now, but you only have to hold on a little longer.
Yes, thank you. I had met him several times while preparing for the funeral, and he has a kind and warm personality, just like Daniel. I felt a little warmth when he said that to me, since they all sounded alike. But what does that mean? That I only have to hold on a little longer? The wake went smoothly, and we were to go to the room where the reception would be held. I was running late as I was being approached by Daniel's colleagues on the way, and I hurried to the table for the relatives. Almost everyone was there, and when I took my seat, I saw an unbelievable sight. There was only one simple cup of instant ramen noodles in front of me. As I froze, my mother-in-law, who was sitting across from me, stood up. She was so lazy and didn't care about my son that she fed him this kind of food when he came home exhausted. It's all your fault that Daniel died. She yelled at me in front of the relatives. Then voices echoed through the room, and the whole audience looked at me with disdain. Instant noodles every day? Poor Daniel. I could hear such whispering. I was stunned at the level of harassment. It would have been enough if she just didn't prepare food for me, but she went to the trouble of preparing a cup of instant ramen noodles with hot water for her to verbally abuse me in front of my relatives. You are not qualified to eat the food here. As I froze up, she spat at me and continued to shout at me. While my mother-in-law yelled at me, I sat down in my chair as if all the tension in my body had been released, and began to eat the noodles. What? My mother-in-law's eyes widened in disbelief, as if she didn't think I would actually eat it. She probably thought I would just run away crying. But I continued to eat without caring, tears welling up with each bite. Daniel. In fact, this ramen was Daniel's favorite, and we used to eat it frequently when we were in college. A taste that holds fond memories for me and Daniel, so to speak. Before I got a job, I recall Daniel saying,
I'm sure I'll be busy when I join the publishing company, so I'll always have to have this on hand,
while slurping his noodles happily. It was his favorite dish. So, even after we got married, I always had it in the pantry, but I rarely served it at meals out of concern for Daniel's health. In the silent room, the attendees looked at me and my mother-in-law in a surprise. In the midst of all this, a man stood up, took a small item out of his bag, and handed it to a staff member at the venue. I looked up and saw it was Kevin.
I'm sorry to bother you at a time like this, but I have a video message from Daniel.
The staff then arranged for a projector to project the video onto the screen at the venue. The person on the screen was in fact Daniel. My mother-in-law and I were stunned by this sudden turn of events.
Sorry to bother you, Kevin. I need your help to save Natalie.
It appears to be a recording of a video call between Daniel and Kevin. Daniel is speaking in front of a wall that appears to be of a conference room at his office.
Actually, it looks like Natalie is being harassed by Mom. I honestly can't believe it.
All eyes in the room were on my mother-in-law. This is all a lie. This is a prank. Turn off the video, Kevin. And then the video cut to our living room. Clean up your mess, ugly wife. You're my housekeeper. Don't eat my food. It was my mother-in-law cursing at me. It appeared to be a recording of our conversation at home, with my mother-in-law's vile slurs, and me apologizing to her one after the other. My mother-in-law looks very pale, shaking while holding her hand to her mouth. Daniel appeared on the projector again and began to explain. According to the story, he said that he didn't think his mother, who took such good care of him, would ever do such a thing, but he couldn't get rid of his doubts, so he has set a camera in the house. Seeing the recordings, Daniel was convinced that terrible wife bullying was taking place. However, he felt that if he pointed this out directly to his mother, she might take that situation and make it even worse. So he decided to denounce it as thoroughly as possible in the presence of a third party and consulted his brother remotely from his work.
Natalie has always been so devoted to me. I love her very much, and she is my beloved wife. But I've just found out that Mom has been treating her very badly. I'll send you the video evidence later. I haven't been able to solve the problem because of my busy work schedule, and I'm causing Natalie a lot of pain. Please, I need your help.
The video stopped there, and the room fell silent again. Hearing Daniel's words, I cried uncontrollably. I couldn't believe that Daniel was so concerned about me, and that he had consulted with Kevin in spite of his busy schedule. I received a sympathetic look from the attendees while they gave a scornful look to my mother-in-law. That mother is a jerk.
Poor Natalie.
So the story about the instant noodles was a lie? The voices of the attendees blaming my mother-in-law grew louder and louder until Kevin finally put the final nail in the coffin.
Apologize to Natalie, and don't harass her ever again.
My mother-in-law could no longer stay there and ran out of the room. After that, Kevin took over, and the wake was over without another incident. When I returned home, my mother-in-law was very upset that her sons had found out about her bullying and was avoiding me. I still haven't been able to get over Daniel's death, but thanks to him, I have regained my peace of mind. After the funeral, relatives who were worried about me after seeing the video visited our house frequently. I'm fine. Please, don't worry about me. My mother-in-law received to the cold stares of the relatives every time they visited. Finally, she couldn't stand such a life any longer and moved far away by herself. She seems to be living on her meager pension and spending her days without any sense of fulfillment. I felt sorry for my mother-in-law, but I wanted to cherish every minute of my life for Daniel, so I didn't contact her. I also joined volunteer activities to appeal for the elimination of death due to overwork in order to reduce the number of victims like Daniel, and started a new life.